We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's May 3rd here in Seoul. I'm Shin-Yeun, and this is News Generation, where we make the news at Arirang's very own open studio. Every morning, we'll discuss the top issues and latest current affairs affecting people in their 20s and 30s. Joining me in the studio is Kim Xiang.
Good morning, Yeun.
Good morning. And Nal Song.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. And both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, we're going to start with our news feed, a news feed which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Have you ever seen Dasha Tehran's YouTube videos? She has over 1.7 million subscribers, and some of her most popular content includes trying out Korean-style makeup. Thanks to her content, global viewers have been paying more attention to K-beauty products and makeup styles. BC Card analyzed that K-cosmetic sales from foreign tourists have jumped by 100 times in the past 2 years. Makeup products have been listed in the top 5 things tourists look for. Back in 2021, it was only the top 20 things people buy in Korea. And members of the Minimum Wage Commission of Korea held their first plenary session on Tuesday with the two biggest labor unions in the country. The unions are aiming to increase the hourly minimum wage by 25% in total to around $9. Currently, the minimum hourly wage is at around $7. And from this week, Germany has implemented the Deutschland ticket, which allows people to use public transport as many times as they want for only $53 a month. German Transport Companies Association, VDV, said more than 3 million people have bought the card already. And that's mainly because the new card is a much more affordable option than previous monthly public transport subscription cards. Now, we're going to take a closer look at the third news item. As soon as Deutschland tickets were open for sale, its online server crashed because so many people were trying to buy them. German's Chancellor Olaf Scholz said he hoped that the tickets would promote more people to travel on public transport instead of driving. This would then reduce carbon emissions and therefore help tackle climate change. Now, this policy also turned the heads of many Koreans as well. That's because as of last year, 8 out of 10 people in South Korea used public transport. The Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport found that most public transport users were teens or people in their 20s and 30s, and South Korea has one of the relatively lowest subway fares in the world. Nonetheless, many young people have voiced their demands for a similar policy to German's Deutschland tickets be implemented. Now, here in the studio, I would like to ask your thoughts, starting with Nell. What do you think about this?
I think it's great. It's, $53 for a month with limitless, access to all public transportation is amazing. And as a freelancer, I do travel a lot and I do have family all over the country. So being able to use whatever type of public transportation to get to places, that would be amazing. But I am a little concerned because the Korean subway, like you mentioned, is, one of the lowest fares in the world. And we're not doing too well with the profits in that area. But I would love it if this happened, but I'm just concerned of how we would execute this.
That's a very interesting point as well. And Xiang, would you like to see Korea implement a similar policy?
Yeah, definitely. As you said, 8 out of 10 Koreans do use public transport, and it is a preferred method in the city as well. I mean, in South Korea, there's so many cars, especially in Seoul. You have 8 lanes in the middle of the city. We still get so much traffic every single day. And as Nal mentioned, it is financially may not be too viable, but I think it will be able to promote traveling around, not just in Seoul, but to nearby cities, which needs a bit of boosting as well in this economy.
For sure, and German officials have actually tried implementing this type of subscription because they're trying to combat rising inflation, especially with the Russian and Ukrainian war going on. We're seeing higher fuel costs and not to mention climate change. Now, moving on to today's discussion topic, a few months back, ParisHilton became a mother to a baby boy, but not the traditional way. Instead, she chose to go through surrogacy. Take a look at the screen to find out more. ParisHilton became a mother in January. Though she didn't choose to have her baby boy the traditional way, there's no doubt she's a mother. How, you ask? Well, through surrogacy, a legal agreement where a woman agrees to have a baby on behalf of another couple or person. This concept might not ring a bell for many Koreans because there are major restrictions against it here in the country. That's why NewsGen will explore these 3 questions. 1. A lot of young Koreans are refraining from having kids at a young age or as a whole. Then what are their thoughts on surrogacy? 2. What exactly are the laws and regulations on surrogacy in Korea? 3. What does it take to become a true mother? What are Millennials and Gen Z's thoughts on this question? As we just saw, today we're going to be talking about surrogacy, and recently we've seen famous celebrities like Paris Hilton make a family through surrogate mothers. So how common is surrogacy abroad, Xiang?
Yeah, I mean, many celebrities have opted for surrogate childbirth. You know, big names like Elton John, Kim Kardashian, Nick Jonas, Cameron Diaz, Nicole Kidman, as well as our fellow journalist Anderson Cooper, quite recently, if I remember correctly. Surrogacy is, of course, essential for gay couples to have children, but many women who aren't medically capable or wants to avoid damage to their body from childbirth are also opting for it.
Definitely. And now, how common is it?
Yeah, I mean, just adding on to that, as far as I know, there's around, 750 babies born per year through surrogacy in the United States. There's many different agencies, and so it's very structured compared to here in Korea and other parts of the world. And recently, I heard about this Spanish actress who was 68 years old.
I heard about that
yeah,
as well.
received a
story.
child through surrogacy, and this became a really hot topic because the child was actually her biological granddaughter.
Right.
She received the sperm donation from her son who passed away 3 years ago through cancer, and she received also a egg donor, and through the help of surrogacy she was able to see her grandchild because this was her son's last will and testament. And there's also other cases in Europe like the Danish royal family, 54 years old couple, and they wanted to have a child, and they're expecting this summer to have the first ever royal being born through surrogacy.
All right. So then I would like to ask, it's a bit confusing where surrogacy is allowed and which countries don't allow it. So why don't we go through the countries that allow it, starting with Xiang?
Yeah, I mean, although regulations differs by state, as you mentioned, the US by far has the highest rate, and states such as California allow both commercial and altruistic surrogacy. So Eastern Europe is well known for its surrogacy market as well, namely Georgia and Ukraine, whereby legislation, the client couple is guaranteed a legal right to the child born through surrogacy. Especially in Ukraine, it's under the Family Code of Ukraine, Section 123. Colombia is also a popular destination, and in countries that allow commercial surrogacy, the cost ranges on average from $32,000 to around $75,000 US dollars. Countries like Thailand and India have disallowed foreigners from purchasing commercial surrogacy services within the past decade. France and Germany have strict regulations also making surrogacy illegal.
And before you add on to that, Nell, can you first differentiate what altruistic surrogacy is and commercial surrogacy is?
Right. Altruistic, simply put, is if somebody is volunteering to be a surrogate for your child and is not, expecting compensation and other than just the medical care that she needs as a surrogate. And commercial obviously means that you can get compensation from it, and that's where a lot of countries differ. And we mentioned earlier about altruistic, and many different countries allow this. More countries allow altruistic than just commercial, but Netherlands, South Africa started legalizing it in the early 2000s and became more activated in the 2010s, and UK also allowed it since 1990s. And so this means that people who aren't able to have kids biologically, just medically, naturally, they can go through a surrogate. But commercial, like Seong mentioned earlier, Eastern Europe, Ukraine was a very popular destination to go find a surrogate mother. But due to the war, it's becoming more and more difficult. And popular destinations like India and Thailand, as he mentioned, have banned foreigners from coming in to do commercial surrogacy.
Right. And why don't we now shed light onto Korea? What is South Korea's stance on surrogacy?
Yes, this is the interesting bit. I did quite a bit of research, and it seems like Korea doesn't yet have a set legislation that specifically deals with surrogacy. However, in the cases of using the surrogate mother's oocyte or a donor's sperm, it is illegal under Section 23 of the Bioethics and Safety Act. Commercial surrogacy is definitely illegal, and even altruistic surrogacy under the two aforementioned categories can be punishable by up to 3 years in prison.
I see.
However, the law doesn't specify the case for just borrowing the surrogate mother's womb if no oocyte or sperm was donated as part of the process. But the contract between surrogate female and client can be nullified under the Article 103 of the Civil Law, which prohibits acts violating social order. So as seen in a court case in, I think, 2006, the judge nullified the surrogacy contract and allowed the surrogate mother to keep the client's child as well as the payment received. Right? So the Korean court also has a history of ruling the birth mother as the rightful parent of the child, whether or not she gave birth through a surrogacy contract.
Right.
You're right. It is a very interesting case we're seeing here in Korea.
It's more of a lawless territory, and similar to Japan as well.
For sure. There's still a lot of gray areas. Now, let's hear from a professor of law and bioethicist to find out more on the legal and ethical aspects of surrogacy. So we're now going to hear from a professor of law and a bioethicist. She's going to be focusing on the legal aspect of surrogacy. It's Michelle Goodwin. Great to have you here, Professor Goodwin.
Hello, thank you very much for inviting me.
All right, so we mentioned all the different countries, including South Korea, and their stance on surrogacy. And I would like to ask how the United States regulates it. How many babies born there are from surrogate mothers?
Well, in the United States, there's very loose regulation of assisted reproductive technologies as a general matter. In the United States, it is not legal necessarily to pay surrogates to be surrogates, but surrogacy takes place in ways that allows for individuals to be compensated for their time and for other aspects of the expenses, let's say, that are associated with their surrogacy. And it's something that has blossomed in the United States as it has around the world because it provides opportunities for individuals who otherwise might be infertile, might be LGBT, or might have health risks. It allows for individuals that experience all those various things to be parents, essentially.
Yes, I mean, Dr. Goodwin, as you mentioned, of course, LGBT community do need surrogate mothers as well. But what are some of the other more common reasons, and why do you think people look for these surrogate mothers?
Well, there are a variety of reasons, and historically, there has been infertility that goes back for millennia. And as Professor Martha Ertman has noted, that for gay couples, Mother Nature, she says, discriminates against them, and what surrogacy provides for is a correction from that type of biological discrimination. But there are any number of reasons that people are choosing surrogacy in these times, including the fact that people who might otherwise, women who might otherwise gestate, have bodies that are perhaps hostile to the pregnancies. I think today we're speaking more honestly about the experiences that women have. Historically, we've tended to think that all pregnancies are perfect, all women are prepared to bear children. And of course, that's just simply not true. And I think there's greater sensitivity to that today.
Professor, I would like to ask your personal stance on surrogacy, whether it be altruistic or commercial. What's your stance on it?
Well, one of the things that we know that happens in any area where we begin to regulate in really deep ways, it means that people sometimes go underground, leading to black markets, to gray markets, meaning that if we think that surrogacy should be only altruistic, that means that not everybody is necessarily going to participate. There are going to be some people for whom 9 months and potentially missing work or having to make significant life adjustments will be much too much unless they have some form of compensation to help them with their rent, with their mortgage, with their expenses, all of those things, because anyone, even if they weren't a surrogate, encounters certain things. You know, prenatal care is necessary. One has to change one's clothes because you no longer fit the clothes that you used to be able to fit. For some people, this also means that there may be the need for bed rest, meaning that you can't work. Now, that's not the case for everybody, but it does mean that if we're honest And if we're sensitive about this, that means that altruism will not always be the answer. And that means that if we're looking at a spectrum of people who are surrogates, what we want is for people to be honest. We want for people to be accountable. We want to make sure that people aren't being coerced into doing this. And we want to be able to make sure that there's fairness all around. One of the challenges with surrogacy is the fact that many surrogates, at least in foreign countries, may not be well educated. Not that that should be a barrier, but it certainly can be if you have to sign a contract, but you can't read. So there is much to be said about making sure that there is honesty and integrity in this process so that surrogates are not exploited.
Those are all very good ideas, but how could that be done? Like, what needs to be done legally to guarantee a safer surrogacy?
Well, that's a very good question, because if we're talking about matters that are domestic, then that means transparent regulations. And that also means making sure that people are well informed, both the people who are the intended parents, as well as the individuals that are surrogates. Making sure that the contracts are in language that they understand. Meaning, if you're presenting someone with a contract and they speak Spanish, the contract shouldn't be written in English or Portuguese. It should be in a language they understand. It should also mean that if they're surrogate signing contracts, the contract should be written in ways that they understand. Meaning, if a contract is written and it's best understood if you're a lawyer, but the surrogate isn't a lawyer, that means that we're not being fair to the surrogate. So there's simple things that can take place in terms of making sure that we respect the capacity of the people who are surrogates, and we explain things in ways that they can understand. But this is now global too. So it also means international collaboration and cooperation. One of the challenges that's come about in surrogacy is that there are people who forum shop. That means they sometimes look at where they can find the cheapest level of surrogacy. And because surrogacy doesn't always work, sometimes what they want to do is implant multiple embryos, but they only want to take one child home. So there are instances where a surrogate may find herself gestating twins or triplets, but you have an American couple that says, we only want one. Well, what happens to the two babies that are born?
Right, we need much more education and awareness on that part, for sure. Thank you so much for sharing all your insightful points today with us, Dr. Goodwin.
You're welcome.
Thank you so
Dr.
much.
Goodwin.
Now we're going to move on and hear from what our global viewers had to say about today's discussion topic. And we asked their thoughts on surrogacy and if they would go through it if the opportunity presents itself. So if you take a look at the screen, you can find out what our viewers had to say. We chose 3 comments. So starting with Gazelle, I really want to have a family one day. However, I am prioritizing my career at the moment. If putting off having a child now means I face obstacles at an older age to have a child naturally, I would definitely consider it. Robin Whitten said, personally, I wouldn't use a surrogate as I feel that the child would not be from my wife or myself, and I just believe I wouldn't be able to overcome that. Leon Teo said, personally, I wouldn't consider it, but it's indeed a viable option for couples who want to have children of their own. Lots of ethical issues remain, though, and I think adoption would be a better option than surrogacy. Now, based on both our viewers' comments and our interview with Professor Goodwin, what are your thoughts on surrogacy, and how do you think millennials and Gen Z in Korea view it?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's a few questions I think compiled into one. First of all, Dr. Goodwin made some really good comments. I think that the main concern about surrogacy itself, especially in countries like the US where it's more common, is the legality and the safety of the surrogate mothers. As she mentioned, a lot of the time the surrogate mothers will come from developing countries, as we mentioned, Ukraine, as well as Colombia and Mexico and things like that. That's why I think more common in the US, that's why she mentioned Spanish, as this should be the language of the contract as well. And I think that should be guaranteed first, the legality side of things.
For sure.
And I mean, as Giselle mentioned, a lot of women, especially these days, younger generation women, who are in workplaces, who have a career, who have high education, who want to get further in their career as well, as quick as possible, don't want to risk losing their career path by having a child. And it's not just the 9 months of pregnancy, you got to recover from it.
Exactly.
You got to take care of the kid until, you know, at least it turns 5 or 6 where you can send it to school. That's still pretty early. And of course, because surrogacy is such an unspoken topic in South Korea, there's not been any public opinion surveys since 2011. According to the Ministry of Health and Welfare survey conducted in 2011, a vast majority of 77% thought surrogacy was problematic, whilst only 14% responded that there is no problem with it. Around 9% of respondents said they don't know about it or have an opinion. 68% also responded that surrogacy should be banned by law. So now let's have a look at what the reasons behind such opposition are. Let's have a look at the screen.
Right.
Out of the multiple selection answers, issues over paternity was chosen most times by almost 60% of respondents. Similarly, at about 50%, many were concerned with commercialization of life. The impediment of social customs and norms was also a big concern, selected by just below 50% of the respondents. This was followed by the concerns over potential infringement of human dignity as well.
I know, and it's worth noting that, as you mentioned, Shion, the Health Ministry hasn't conducted any surveys on this matter since 2011. That's just how much, not a lot of awareness we have towards surrogacy here. But do you guys think there are any cases abroad that South Korea should take into consideration or try to blueprint when it comes to legalizing and making better, better guidelines for surrogacy?
Right. I mean, as we mentioned, there was many cases of celebrities, and then there was the Danish royals. And
Yes.
as as the professor mentioned, that there needs to be proper steps taken for this to be a safe environment for the surrogate and the child, and for the parents to have, a fair understanding before the child comes. So, to really take after that and use it as an example, make really clear guidelines for everybody in all the parties involved. I think that would be the first step to getting to a better surrogacy.
And this is just my idea, but I think they, really put more attention to post-care, because it's not just about having the child and then like, giving it to the actual parents. It's also about the surrogate mother and her health, because, pregnancy is a very strenuous process that needs a lot of medical attention.
I mean, especially in Korea, the population is decreasing.
Exactly.
As you mentioned, I think it could be a good idea. The women who are willing to have children,
Right.
who might need the financial compensation as well,
sure.
and who would be actually agreeing
Willing
to these
to.
conditions, I think it should be allowed in countries such as Korea.
Right. And all right, we'll be here every day from 9:30 a.m. to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics that young people are talking about. Special thanks to Kim Xiao
Always my pleasure, Yan.
and Nelsong.
No problem.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are
News Generation.